I would like to introduce Todd. He's the chairman of Kanban University, veteran software leader, and co-author of Stand Back and Deliver, whose 40+ years in tech and leadership have shaped the Agile movement worldwide. A true pioneer, Todd continues to inspire teams and organizations to accelerate business agility through practical wisdom and visionary insight. So please give a round of applause for Todd.
So thank you. I'm Todd Little. I'm actually the past chairman. I've stepped down from the formal role of chairman. I'm working on, it was something that we'd planned for a while. I'm reaching a point where I want to step back a bit and enjoy some other things, but I'm still staying active. So this is one of those things I really enjoy. It's been, when I discovered that we were having this event, I had already signed up to do Agile India about a month ago. And my good friend of Naeem, who we've been talking about coming to Bangladesh for the last, 2-3 years, I finally said, we'll have to do it. And he said, let's do it. So really glad to be here and get the experience. And I've been enjoying it. I've been having 5 weeks in the continent and the last week in Bangladesh, really getting to experience how things are. So with that, we're going to get started in evolutionary change. I appreciate the help here. Okay. All right, which direction? So just a bit about me, Todd Little. And like Kiro, I am actually a chemical engineer from my training. That was my background from an academic perspective. Then I went to work in the oil and gas industry and became a petroleum engineer, which is very, very similar. And then since that, I was developing, rather than actually applying my chemical engineering as a practitioner, I was developing software for petroleum engineers. So I was doing engineering to try to predict future production from oil and gas reservoirs that went out 30, 40+ years. Doing some really cool stuff, really enjoyed it. And as I did, so that was with Halliburton, Landmark Graphics division. And so over time, I got more and more involved in managing the activity of software development. And as I was doing that, I was applying my engineering concepts, but I was developing our software for that purpose. And as I started doing more management, I started to say, well, maybe I should look at what other people are doing in the industry with regards to managing software. And this is during the 1990s. And in the 1990s, the prevailing mindset of software development was, as Giro mentioned, it was pretty much a waterfall mindset or a very structured approach. And they were, and the really thing that was insulting to me was they were calling this engineering. And as a chemical engineer, none of what was happening in what people were saying they were developing software matched any of what I was doing, actually writing software, and my team's writing software, or what I had learned as a chemical and petroleum engineer. It just didn't match. They had misused the word engineering for really manufacturing. So that was really a manufacturing mindset, when in fact what we were doing was creating knowledge. And creating knowledge is a different approach. Creating knowledge requires discovery, requires knowledge, and understanding how to work with that. And it requires evolution. It requires getting better and continuing to understand things. That's really what my engineering background was about. So with that, eventually I was, worked up to different executive levels, managing. In the meantime, I discovered the Agile community. Very early on, I met, at one of these conferences where I was trying to discover, I'd met Jim Highsmith in, I think, 1998. He was my sort of first connection to someone that I really felt got software development the same way I was doing it. Eventually met up with him and Alistair Coburn, and they were talking about running a conference like this. They said, we're going to run an Agile conference. And I had been doing software conferences within my company, doing development conferences within my company, and I told Alistair, hey, do you want to, you like these ideas we've got? I'll help you run that conference. And so with that, that was sort of my introduction into the Agile space back in 2002, 2003, and Alistair and I ran the first Agile development conference, which has become the Agile the large Agile conference in the US under the Agile Alliance. So I was on the board of the Agile Alliance. I was also one of the founders of the Agile Leadership Network, along with Jim Highsmith, Alistair Coburn, and several others. And eventually, I decided to join and get into it, and I worked with Kanban University for the last 7 years, really trying to develop the global network of Kanban practitioners that we have. So that's my background, really, in a nutshell. And all of that is evolving, to the question, why are we having challenges? And so in my long career, looking at Agile implementations, I sort of see 4 patterns, and these are just sort of natural patterns. It worked for us, and we continue to get better. Maybe it helped a little bit, but we haven't gotten much better lately. There's the Agile's been a disaster, and Agile didn't really help, but it really didn't hurt either. Right? So with that, I'm going to do a quick poll here now. How many are in that lucky first quadrant where it's worked for you and it continues to get better? All right, that's good. How many of you are perpetual liars? Okay, no, that's a joke. And there really are a lot of people in this category. There are people who are really getting better, and I see it, and they're doing great. So that's wonderful, because I think they've got the secret sauce. So how many are getting a little bit of benefit, but it's sort of stagnated now? A few in that category? Okay. So how many are willing to admit it's been a total disaster? Or you've seen disasters, right? Yeah, okay. It doesn't mean you're there still, right? You run away from it. And how about it? Yeah, you tried it, it didn't really help. You're trying to figure out how you can get better. Okay. And how many are just new and haven't really even started yet, and you're hoping for some great words of wisdom? Okay, great. Okay. So, yeah, that's great. So the reality is a lot of people are not in this first quadrant. I mean, they're not in that happy place. In fact, Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-founders of Scrum, frequently claims 58% of Scrum implementations are late, over budget, with unhappy customers. That's not a great success rate. And I think that's why we're struggling. A lot of us are struggling in why are we failing at Agile? We're not getting it. This is really particularly challenging. And we see this a lot. This is one of the things we see with the people that are looking at how can we augment our Scrum implementations, and particularly with Kanban. Kanban is one of the approaches that we can use in conjunction with Scrum, and we can improve it. I guess so. So moving on to why are we having these challenges? I think one of the challenges is the fact we talk about transformations. We just tend to, in this industry, love transformations. And it's something that we say, oh, we've got a digital transformation, now we've got to do an Agile transformation. And how many people are now doing AI transformations, right? It's just, I went into one company and they had 4 transformations happening at the same time. I think they blew up their WIP limit because none of them were working either, right? There's just too much going on, too confused, and they had to refocus, right? And so the challenge with transformations, and as they're designed, it was McKinsey who came up with the magic formula, really, was you try to understand your current process, and you say, wouldn't it be great if we had this future process? And from there, you say, great, future state. Everyone likes that. Let's go for it. Let's transform. Let's make a transformation. The problem with this, there's multiple problems. One is this future process. Oops. Okay. This future process, I'm hitting too many buttons. This future process has to be designed and defined in advance. And what is this happening is, how do we actually know what that is? The problem is that most Agile transformations are done with a big bang waterfall approach. The same thing we're trying to tell people not to do. And I think that's one of the big reasons they fail on the get-go. But there's other reasons they fail too, and that is because they don't continue to improve. So this is the essence, I would say, of the Kanban method. Rather than trying to transform in that same way, we start with your existing process and framework. We understand what you do today, even if it's terrible. We want to understand what you're doing today, because only by understanding what you do today do we have the opportunity to really improve it. And as well as, if you're doing something today, there's probably some good things that are in there. We really want to understand that. So we start with the existing process or framework. All right, this remote is... Oh, there it is, okay. We start with the existing framework. All right. While we're fixing this, I have to share, we've had this issue with power outages today, and I have to share, because I've been doing the Agile India conference for a number of years, and so the first 1 or 2 years, we had a little bit of problems with power outages. When I was in India, I was expecting it. The irony story that I have to share is that during COVID, we were doing remote, virtual presentations. And so I was really so I was doing this for the Agile India conference, and in a strange twist of fate, rather than having a power outage in India, I had a power outage in Houston. I had a terrible storm. I had a battery backup, so I'm thinking it's going to be great. But my internet provider was dead. I had no internet. And so the exact opposite of what I was expecting, it still happens everywhere. So did that buy me enough time to get to get a fix? So anyways, I can talk through this a little bit. The thing is, what we're trying to do with Kanban is start with what you do now and evolve it continuously. Continue to get better and better. And one of the things that you will find, what we really find from the Kanban perspective, is that people's understanding of Kanban doesn't really understand this evolutionary change part. They don't think of that as the primary part. I think that that's the most important part of Kanban, is the evolutionary change component. Well, I can't talk to that slide, okay. But, yeah, the evolutionary change part is the most important part of Kanban. Yes, the visualization is wonderful. That's a great part of it too. The work in progress is great, the managing flow. But ultimately, we need to continue to get better, and that's where evolutionary change comes in. So let me see. So how we work it is we add Kanban practices and principles on top of your existing approach or framework. Kanban itself is not a process framework. Kanban is an approach, it's a management method for continuing to improve what you do. And that's a very important element of the Kanban approach. It's a method for managing and improving knowledge work, service delivery through evolutionary change. So if that's the case, what's this issue with evolutionary change? How do we do it, right? And the key reason we do it is because it is humane. It's a humane approach, and it's a sustainable approach. There are two types of evolution we used to look at. One is the one we usually talk about within Darwinism, evolution of species, right? It occurs uniformly and by the steady and gradual transformation of whole lineages. So what most people associate. And this is very important. That's probably the one we try to work with most of the time. But there is another approach, there is another type of evolution, and that would be what we call a punctuated equilibrium. This is where something drastic changes the environment, and in response to that drastic change in the environment, we have to adapt in order to survive. And that drastic change of environment happens to us all the time, right? So COVID is a great example, something that came from the outside and required us to adapt drastically. Changes to virtual meetings, learning how to work virtually, remotely. And so things like that. Also, a reorganization can be a drastic change. Now, the thing is, frequently we try to rely on the punctuated equilibrium to get change, and these are really painful. Right? The Darwin as a gradual change is much more humane. It's much easier if we adopt the change in small doses than trying to take on big changes. Big changes result in a lot of chaos happening, right? And that chaos can sometimes generate better behavior, but it also can result in disaster. The other element of change is whether the change is pulled or pushed, right? You get in Kanban we talk about pull, right? We want to pull things through the system. We want to look for pull. But oftentimes we're pushing things into the system or pushing down. So with change, is the change coming down and being asked to change, or are we pulling it intrinsically saying, yes, let's change as an organization, let's change as a team, let's change as an individual. So this is a picture from the US. This is Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam was invented what came out in World War I, and it was a push, right, to try to get people to enroll in fighting in World War I in the US, right? So, and it's got the finger pointed, right? We want you, right? And I think many organizations, when they want you, we want you to change. It's coming pushed down because the organization says we need change, we got to get change, so we're going to force you to change somehow. The problem with this is we're all human beings. Human beings don't like this behavior, right? And it's not that people resist change, they resist being changed, right? They resist being told they need to change. So change initiatives, and most of the change management approaches are all based on forcing you to change, right? The Kanban method takes a very different approach. How can we get you, as your team, to start buying in and pulling change? How do you change that behavior? So we start with the change management principles. What are those change management principles? As I mentioned before, we start with what you do now, right? We agree to pursue evolutionary change, and then very importantly, we need to take acts of leadership at all levels in order to encourage that change to happen. So we start by developing and visualizing a joint understanding of the current way of working. Not what you say you do, what you actually do, right? And then improvements are identified and implemented. So what this means in practice is understanding the current processes that's actually practiced, respecting existing roles, responsibilities, and job titles. We don't change job titles when we come in. We leave it what they may evolve, but start with what you do now, because changes like that, changing in job titles, say you're a project manager and told now you're a Scrum Master, or now you're a product owner, whatever that might be. That's a change in identity. And that change in identity is impacting that individual. Some may love it, but others may feel, but I really felt I was professionally a project manager, and I don't feel good about that. And this is change that we've gone through. So the Kanban method respects that. Now, if you've changed and you're now a product owner, we leave you product owner, right? We don't change that. If you're changed, become a Scrum Master, we even let you stay as a Scrum Master. Totally fine. We come in and try to evolve it from where you're at now. Agree to pursue evolutionary change. What does that actually mean in practice? It means make small changes only as much as you're comfortable making, right? So you work at the small changes, you get comfortable making them, and you get better. And acts of leadership at all levels means you need to get comfortable being just a bit uncomfortable. Right? Everyone in the organization needs to be comfortable standing up and saying, let's get better. Right? And it means that the leaders cannot suppress the team members. The leaders have to enable the team members to step up and take the acts of leadership. It's one of the challenges I see in the region. I see it very much in India. I think I see it here as well, where the culture is such that only the leaders are allowed to make decisions. Only the leaders are allowed to talk. And that is suppressing all the knowledge that's available in the team. I know it's going to be a tough challenge culturally to shift that, but I think for the real growth to happen, that change has to happen, because that's what's happening in the rest of the world, where every team member is stepping up, taking change. And that's where we see the huge breakthroughs in the Kanban method, when all team members step up and do that. So how do we go about getting change? Well, first we start with, what is the motivation for change? Where does that come from? First, there needs to be a stress. There needs to be pain. Pain is the motivation for change. Just as people coming from a product development perspective, people buy your product because there's change, because there's pain. They want to solve a problem. So here we've got a stressor, some sort of pain for the team, for the organization. We then need a reflection mechanism to make that pain surface, all right? You can be a retrospective, whatever, right? We're looking for how to get that surface so the team looks at it, and then they take the acts of leadership. And the acts of leadership are what close the feedback loop. And that moves us on. So that's the sort of the base formula that we work from. This is in action here, an example. This is from David Anderson's Blue Book, the cover of the Blue Book. And you can see this conversation they're having. I'm stuck, I'm too busy, I'm idle. Well, let's do something about it. So what are the dynamics here that we can look at? There's a lot packed into this one picture. There's feedback mechanisms here. The conversation's a feedback mechanism. The board is a feedback mechanism. It's showing what's happening. We're seeing a lot of tickets and analysis. We're seeing empty and test. Board's talking. And also, maybe we have some reports, some metrics. Maybe that's telling us something. These are all feedback mechanisms. Now, what turns this into a feedback loop is let's do something about it. That's the acts of leadership. If you have the meeting and you don't take the acts of leadership, you have what we call in the chemical engineering world an open loop. Open loops don't correct themselves. Feedback loops correct themselves. And you get better and continue to improve. That's what makes a feedback loop. And this is fundamental. I think agility, when I discovered agility, actually finally someone has discovered feedback loops, because this is really what it's all about. And something that was sort of core to my training in chemical engineering. So feedback without action is not a feedback loop. It's open loop. And it has limitations. In fact, nothing will ever get better in that mode. So how often I hear of people holding retrospectives, and they religiously hold the retrospectives, and they do nothing from it, right? If you're holding a 2-hour, I talked to a bunch of other coaches, oh wow, I've got this new retrospective and it's so fun, right? Well, did you do anything? Oh no, we just, Okay, so they had a fun way of bitching about it, right? And that's what too often retrospectives turn into. Most of the time, retrospectives can be done very, very fast. You don't need these formal things to do it. It's basically just, hey, it hurts, right? Let's do something about it. And I'll go through an approach of doing that. So the thing is, with evolutionary change, you don't want to be like biology, where everything is being changed, as things evolve. We're actually humans and organizations. We can actually take action here. So it's managed evolutionary change, where we're going to try to design the system and design the results that we want. Because we really know some theory about the underlying behavior. And we use feedback loops, scientific method being the approach, right? So if we put that scientific method in the sense of how we look at it from a knowledge work perspective, we start with an observation. That observation is it hurts somewhere. That's the stressor. Where's the pain? From there, we reflect on the problem. What is that source of the pain? What can we actually do? How do we interpret and have a deeper conversation about that? We then start looking to explore solutions to those. This is an important element here that I think I often see ignored. Based on that, then evaluate the difficulty and the resistance. Because there will be resistance, there will be difficulty, there will be challenges. We need to understand that because we need to figure out which ones we want to try to take on. We then design an experiment, run the experiment. Did we discover anything from that experiment? Is it working better? We evaluate the fitness. Is it working better or not? If it's working better, we work on to the next thing that hurts. If it's not, then we try to figure out what do we need to do to close this one out, or do we just abandon it? I mean, all of those are things we can do. But this is this high level. I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail now. For an example with perhaps a Scrum team that's looking at this. Yeah, if it no longer hurts, we drop it and we move on to the next one. Otherwise, we sort of circle back. Sort of basic stuff, but it's a framework that people can start, a model people can start working with rather than focusing so much on different techniques of the retrospective without actually doing something. This is a way to actually do something about it, and that's what closes the loop. So here's an example that we use in our training where it hurts. So this is Rosie, who is our Kanban expert. And so he's talking about here's some things that hurt. So there's a number of different items up here. So they're doing their retrospective for whatever and coming up with items. And they highlighted 3 of them. So here's one where we're constantly set up for failure with the goals that are unrealistic. The sprint scope keeps changing. And then testing takes way too long. So they hold their event and they start talking this through, and then they high grade these 3. These 3 are the ones they want to investigate further. So that's that first step of the problem. Where's it hurting? And they have other areas too, but they thought these were the ones they really wanted to focus on. So here, from hurting, now we're going to reflect on the problem. So we're going to break them down a little bit further. So here were the 3 items that we had. Constantly set up for failure with unrealistic goals. Well, maybe our goals are unreal, or we're doing a poor job setting our goals. Maybe we have inadequate resources. Stakeholders are making promises before we see them, or our metrics are misaligned. Typical types of problems we see regularly. The second one is sprint scope keeps changing. Maybe a lack of clear vision, too much unplanned work, and we discover things in the middle of a sprint, right, that we didn't anticipate. And the last one, testing is taking way too long. QA is overloaded, too many defects, test automation isn't in place, and a weak definition of done. And these are fairly common problems we see. We actually went out and interviewed a number of Scrum Masters to try to figure out what type of problems they had, and this was reflective of a number of them. So if you're seeing these resonate with you, yeah, other people are having these same types of problems. But the problems aren't the main thing I'm trying to talk about. More I'm talking about how do we take these problems and then figure out how do we design experiments around it. So the next step is we want to explore solutions. And frequently what I see happen is this gets flipped around. People say, oh, we should be doing practice X. Well, why? Oh, because I saw this other team do practice X. No, that's not a good excuse. That's not a good approach, right? You want to be looking at, you want to do practice X because there's a fundamental problem that is appropriate for you right now. So you get these in the right order. Start with the problem and then work to solutions. Don't jump to solutions before you've understood why. Always start with why. So if you start looking at that, we look at the core practices of the Kanban method as an indicator. So visualize is one of those. Limiting work in progress. Managing flow. Making our policies explicit. Establishing feedback loops. And improving collaboratively, evolve experimentally. These are sort of the core elements, and behind all of these are the general practices, and behind that there's more specific practices. And you're not, when you're improving, you're not limited to this. It's just that we have a large body of knowledge of these things work really well. These are things to look at as you're improving. So here we look at the team's ideas and where they went to. So looked at the problem, identified a potential cause, right? We have too much unplanned work, we have a weak definition of done, and QA is overloaded. Those were the three they wanted to work on. They came up with some ideas, WIP limits, a policy on handling unplanned work, and visualizing the unplanned work in a swim lane. These are sort of standard responses we might do in a Kanban approach. The weak definition of done, rewrite the definition after, make it a tighter definition, and the second one, maybe enforce it. Okay, so those are two parts of it. QA is overloaded. Look at visualizing what QA is working on, so the visualization part, establishing a WIP limit, one per tester, implement automated testing, or hire more staff. Just things we might do. Now we've got some ideas here, so let's look at that. Let's take this collection of ideas we've got and then run them through another filter, exploring resistance and difficulty. So one of the key elements also of the Kanban method is we talk about being like water, looking at the resistance and flowing around the water. So we get this idea partially from the philosopher Bruce Lee, philosopher and martial arts. So with that, let me see if it plays.
This is what it is, okay? I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now, you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
So this is really, I think, the essence of what we're trying to do. We need to look at not trying to change the environment. We actually need to understand the environment, because by understanding the environment we're in, we need to be like water around that environment. So if you remember, water becomes the cup. So this is a little story. We hear this all the time. We can't be agile unless we can change the culture, right? How many have heard that, right? You got to fix the culture first, right? So 10 years ago, Alistair Coburn hosted a 10-year reunion of the manifesto, and a lot of us got together. And I made the comment that Agile needs to adapt to culture as much as culture needs to adapt to Agile. And it sort of went on deaf ears. Nobody else seemed to like this concept. But fundamentally, this is what I'm talking about now, evolutionary change. And I think David Anderson was there. He may have also agreed with this. The thing is, we need to stop complaining about why we can't do this. And we just need to take some acts of leadership and start moving. And evolutionary change is that approach. Every team can be able to do some improvement, even if they're in a terrible culture. You work through your culture. Your culture is one of those rocks. Right? Now, what you don't want to do is the around the rocks approach that I think Dean Leffingwell did with SAFe. So Dean Leffingwell says, well, since culture is my problem, I'm going to give them exactly what they want, which is a big, massive, waterfallish looking thing. And that's my around the rocks approach to culture. Right? No, we're talking about actually getting something done. He got something done, which was selling a bunch of SAFe certificates. The Kanban method is not about selling certificates. It's about getting work done. And we have huge testimonials about people whose lives have changed as a result of this, of taking this approach on. And why do we want to avoid the rocks? Is because rocks are painful. Right? We don't want to keep running into them. So how does it work in real life? There's a number of approaches that I've used. One is going under the radar. Right? You can go under the radar because the resistance is is coming from, I don't want to hear that, right? So you got to go, you hide it a little bit. And this is one thing in Agile, we talk about always wanting transparency. But having been in leadership roles, transparency is wonderful until it's not. Right? And there are times where being too transparent is actually working against you. And being under the radar is one of those approaches you can use. Figuring out what the constraints are, what the rules are, playing just there, and then exposing it once you've actually been hugely successful. I've used this approach a number of times, and some great examples of things that where the system has certain rules, you figure out how to do it in a different way. Another approach is breaking it down. Make the big rocks smaller rocks, right? And that's an approach we take all the time, is to try to figure out what's the smallest thing we can do. That's an evolutionary change approach. Erode it, take it down. And then the third one is when you need to get buy-in. Say you have someone who's a detractor in the organization. You say, well, trust me, can we just run an experiment? We don't have to make the change. We just want to run the experiment. And if the experiment runs, then we'll figure out what to do about it. So this is a sort of a cross between these two, but this is being transparent about it. We're saying, yes, we're going to run an experiment which you may disagree with right now, but we're going to get the results and then make a decision after that. So these are 3 different approaches you can use for dealing with resistance. The thing is, you're going to get resistance. It's, how much? Is it a little or a lot? The technical difficulty, is it hard? From a technical perspective, require iterations to learn and put into place. And then there's another angle here, is you actually have the ability to influence this change. So these all come together, and we put this, the other element of this is how deep is the resistance, right? With these, the resistance can be to the problem, to the solution, or the implementation. And it can either be that they disagree with the approach, or they actually are pained by the approach somehow. They're actually winning by the dysfunction. And you're telling them, I want to change that. You want to know that. So this is a conversation, really, to surface these issues, because you don't want to be going into something knowing that you're likely going to have some problems with it. So from that, we've developed this approach, looking at combining the resistance from people and also technical difficulty, because this is an indication of how hard this is going to be. And this is an indication of what's your ability to influence it. Do you have autonomy or not? So if your autonomy will be on the high, and low autonomy over on that side, the ability to change. And from around this, then, we're looking for the upper right. There's every 2-quadrant model, you're always looking in the upper right. That's the way they teach you. So straight ahead means this is simple enough, and we know how to do it. We have the ability to do it. So you want to look for those things. Once you've exhausted all of those, then you're probably going to look more likely at the around the rocks, and you're going to look also at the around the rocks. Maybe, is there a way to shift those so that they become easier? Where you don't have autonomy, and they're hard, these you pretty much defer. And you could have an example where you don't have the autonomy to do it, but it's not that hard, so you need to work with someone, right? So maybe this is something like a dependency. You need to work with someone that you're dependent on. You can't solve the problem yourself, but it means, hey, let's work together and solve that issue. So from that, we mapped out the different things. So here, hire more staff. Well, it's not going to happen, right? We don't have the ability to do it ourselves, and it's going to be a lot of resistance. We can look at rewriting the definition of done. We can expand the workflow to visualize what QA is focusing on, and establish a WIP limit of 1 per tester. So these 3 things look like they were the high-graded items. Maybe more difficult to enforce the definition of done. That may come later. Or implementing automated testing. Great idea, we have the ability to do it, but it's going to be super hard. Technically difficult, technically challenging. So from that, then, we run our experiments. We design the experiments and look at it. So we believe that if we do these 3 items, that testing will solve the problem that testing is taking too long. So they felt that they were comfortable, in this case, taking on all 3 of these. That may not be the right answer. There's 2 reasons why that might not be the best answer. We use this one as an example, but by choosing 3 experiments, 2 things might happen. One is we take on too much, right? So our WIP limits, we're big on WIP limits in Kanban. Maybe 3 was too many. Right? The other thing that can happen when you're running experiments is that they could be conflicting. Right? We get a result and we don't know which of the 3 actually gave the best result. So 3 is probably the max I would ever do on something like this during a particular test. 1 is actually not a bad thing. If you just did 1 at a time and got really good at doing 1, you're going to keep getting better. And that's the thing we're after, is how do we keep getting better? So then we do evaluation. Did it hurt or not? And the options to consider if we roll back a change, if it's not fitting, if the pain is still there, do we want to keep the change and try something new? If the pain is gone, then let's start looking at the next one because there's still another pain. We know there's always another pain there. And there can be a case where there doesn't appear to be an obvious pain, right? And what's probably happened then is you've plateaued. You've hit a plateau of a certain extent, and maybe this is a chance where you have to look at, is there something else, but you're not able to see it? I mean, maybe it's at the point where you don't have the ability to make that next step. This is where the Kanban maturity model can be of help, because the Kanban maturity model looks at the fact that we can hit plateaus, and then we can have to have an outside influence to try to move on to that next level and can keep the improvement coming. And it could be something like you've done a great job at the team level, but at the actual system or product level, there's improvements that could be made, but you don't have the ability to do it. So this is where you try to pull that together and raise it up. And the Kanban maturity model is a great way for looking at that. So evolutionary change, we start with an initial maturity, evaluate the fitness, figure out what we're doing. We keep making these changes. We might roll back, might roll forward. We keep evaluating. And ultimately, the future process, future maturity emerges from that. So it's evolving, right? And that's what evolutionary change is about. So with that, I wrap up. This is my LinkedIn, happy to link in with you. If you're really interested in more about the Kanban method, this is a link to the official guide to the Kanban method, available free. If you're interested in a course, there's a Scrum Better with Kanban course available. And the other thing, brand new news, if you look up here on the Scrum Alliance page here, you will see these micro-credentials, okay? We've just signed, the Kanban University has just signed an agreement with Scrum Alliance to offer the Scrum Better with Kanban as a joint credential between the Scrum Alliance and Kanban University. So anyone who will be signing, or if you take it through the right channels, you'll end up being able to get a credential in both organizations. So with that, I think I have right out the boundary here. Any time for questions or no time for questions?
So we'll take the question later.
Okay, we'll take questions later.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you very much.